Welcome to the Family Life Blended podcast. I'm Ron Deal. We help blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. Both the vertical relationship with God and the horizontal relationship that matter most here on earth. That's what we're targeting. And there's no more important relationships than those in our very own homes. Sabrina McDonald returns to the Family Life Blended podcast. So good to have you back with me.
Good to be here.
I appreciate you coming and being with me today. She's joining me here in the studio in Little Rock, which doesn't get to happen very often. So I always love it when I get a guest who's sitting right here beside me.
It's good to be here. It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you live here in Little Rock with your family.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it's good to have you. You've written so much for Family Life in the past and lots of other ministry outlets. And now you got a new book. Mm-hmm. A Home Built from Love and Loss, Coming Together as a Blended Family. It's published by Focus on the Family. I'm sure that was a great collaboration for you.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, it's a great experience working with them, and everything is so well done and professional. So I'm very grateful that they took my manuscript and made it into something that people can read and enjoy.
Well, let me just remind our viewers who might not be familiar with you. You've written, like I said, prolifically in the past, articles about a variety of things related to marriage, family, relationships, loss. Mm-hmm. You've been through a bunch of that. Speak at various events around the country. You've spoken for us in the past. You married Robbie and formed your blended family and now have this book out. Now, one other thing I'll mention, you've been on our podcast before, and you and I, back in the day, did a number of podcasts together for FamilyLife, FamilyLife Today, that radio show, and it's now a podcast. And so one of the things I've learned about you is you are more than willing to be very revealing about your life. And as I read your book, and I endorsed the book, by the way, it's really
Thank
well
you
done.
for that.
You're welcome. You lay it out there. You just put a lot of your life out there for people. Why do you do that? And what's it like to do that? And what's your goal?
It was funny. The other day, my best friend, was reading the book, and she said, it's kind of blowing my mind because I was in these places, and seeing it from your perspective. And I said, yeah, you're kind of reading my diary right now.
That's right.
And that I just wanted people to know that they're not alone, to know that they can have a successful blended family, but not in when I say the word successful, I don't mean perfect.
Okay.
I mean that you will make lots of mistakes, and that's okay. And that's life. And we can keep on living, and we can keep on picking ourselves up, and we can learn from those things and continue on. Because what's most important in any family, really, but particularly in a blended family, is that time matters. If you will just keep going, then you will get to a place where you finally feel like, this is my family, But at first, on those first few years, it's so easy to give up and just say, forget it. This is too hard. We made a mistake.
Is it fair to say sometimes people in the beginning say, this is not my family? It doesn't feel like family.
Well, it's kind of not, in a way.
Right. At least it is and it isn't. In some ways, really for everybody, step-parents especially, and children. It is and it isn't. And they're still trying to find their way into that sense of familyness.
That's exactly right.
In a greater degree.
I mean, you're putting two things together, and that doesn't happen instantly. It has to grow together, and you can't, in the book, I talk about it like the TV show Survivor. You take one group of people and another group of people, and you put them on an island. They're total strangers, and you're saying, live together. And oh, by the way, you're supposed to all love each other. Yeah. We call you family.
And collaborate, and be successful in the tasks we give you.
And I mean, how do you do that with a total stranger? And when you're going into it, for some reason we believe that. For some reason we really do think, when we all get in the same house together, we will just automatically love each other. And we might have a couple of fights or disagreements, but no, really in general, we'll just all have this warm, fuzzy feeling. I don't know why we think that, but we do. maybe God blinds us. So we'll actually, get in there and do it. Because I think if we really knew what we were getting into, a lot of people would be more standoffish. Go, I don't know if this is what I want to do. But once we get in there, reality sits in, and you begin to realize this is a lot harder than I thought.
Well, I've said that. I'm so glad you said that, because I've made that observation about a lot of things in life. If we really knew what we were getting into, we might not have jumped in. And I just want to put parenting at the top of that list.
Right.
God help us. If we
So
really
true.
thought through, we're responsible for a human being.
Right.
And we got to feed them and care for them. And that's the easy part. We got to grow them up emotionally. We got to teach and train them. We got to instill values in them. And we're going to be fighting the world and all of its influences for 18 and beyond, 20, 25, 30, 40 years.
Right.
And it's like, if we really thought what's required of us, we would never do it.
Right.
And yet it's the most beautiful thing in the world, and it's a precious, precious honor to be able to raise and influence a child. Right. But man, is it a massive task.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, so all of this is reminding me of a quote in your book. But first, before I read you.
Okay.
Don't you love it when people do that?
Yes.
I'm going to do that too. Let me read to you something else. We got some feedback about this podcast from somebody. Pastor Brian shared on Apple Podcasts. He says, I thought that remarriage and the integration of my family would be so easy. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Why is it so hard? He says, why didn't anyone tell me all the potential pitfalls? Well, here is an amazing and invaluable resource for step families talking about this podcast. Now, here's your quote in your book that was so just ringing true of Pastor Brian. You say this, almost all blended families follow the same basic journey. We start out brimming with hope, but then reality sets in. We realize that remarriage didn't fix everything. Indeed, some things got much worse. That leads to questions and doubts, and eventually to the crossroads where all remarried must decide, hang on and keep going, or give up and quit. Those of us who keep going eventually reap the rewards, but not without our scars. Okay, now that first part you talked about just a minute ago, you got to keep going.
Right.
And you get the rewards. But now I want you to talk about that second part, scars. You got a few scars? What are
Oh, yeah.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah, there's so many scars. Well, there's so many things that you don't realize are going to happen. Jealousy of the first spouse. Even in our case, where the spouse is deceased, that person loved that first spouse.
Yeah.
And you, especially in those early times where you can feel, you understand that this person doesn't love you the way that they loved their first spouse. They can't.
Yeah.
They were married to that person so much longer. They have so much more, they have many memories together. They have children together. And you begin to wonder, will I ever find a place in that person's heart? So there's those kinds of questions. There's the question of the step-parenting situation where you're having discord in your home, or you're disagreeing with your spouse over the way the children should be raised, or you think your spouse doesn't love your child. So there's all of those kinds of questions. And then there's battles that take place, as you go through those things. And not only battles with your spouse, battles with your children, battles with your stepchildren, battles with yourself. You begin to question things in your own heart and wonder, did I make the right choice? Did I do the wrong thing? You start to hear the warnings of people from your past, like, oh, I shouldn't have gotten into this relationship. So all of those kinds of questions go on, and that's where the scarring comes from. You begin to you have wounds.
Yeah.
You just do. And what I tell people is that one of the other things in that quote is that people think they come into a relationship to solve their problems. My kids don't have a dad; they need a dad, or I'm lonely, I need a spouse, whatever the case may be. But what they don't realize is that the blended family itself creates problems. It creates grief. It creates sorrows. So yes, you may be solving some problems like your loneliness, but you're going to create problems like jealousy of the first spouse, that you didn't see coming.
Yeah.
So there's problems that are created there. And that itself is the problem. So they think they're solving problems, and they come in and they've created a whole new set of problems that they have to deal with.
Yes, and they didn't anticipate that.
Right.
And by the way, I just want to say to people, okay, so you're maybe waking up to that even now. You're hearing Sabrina say it, and you're going, that's it. Now what do I do? Like, what you don't do is sit around and beat yourself up.
Right.
I mean, you couldn't see what you can't see. We don't know what we don't know. Like, honestly, that's why another big reason we walk in faith with a God who is a whole lot bigger than us, because he can see what we need even when we don't.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we're trusting him to help us figure out what that next step is.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to wrestle with that scar and wound and hold on to hope.
That's right. And that really is the key, honoring God and honoring his word and understanding that, see, how do I put it? When you come into a marriage and it's not your first marriage, it's so much easier to give up on that marriage because you say, well, I was married once before. I've already ruined that in the eyes of God. Now, what is it if I just ruin this one in the eyes of God too? I'm sort of already scarred. I've already messed up. Excuse me. But when you think you've already messed up, that's where you're wrong, is that in this marriage, you've created something new. You've created a new covenant. You've created a new relationship with someone. And God wants us to honor that relationship also. He wants us to get in there, even if you've been divorced the first time and that marriage ended. This marriage is something new, and you can keep going in this marriage and honor God with this marriage. So that's really the key, is that we want to honor the Lord, and we want to create something in this marriage that is a reflection of who he is. So, Ephesians 5, I know you're familiar with that passage. It's Ephesians 5:22 through 33. And it talks about marriage being the image of Christ in the church. That's what we want to create there. We want that image for our kids. We want that image in the community. And that's what you're fighting for. Yes, there are going to be problems in this relationship. Yes, there are going to be things that you look and go, why didn't I see this coming? I should have known better, whatever the case may be. But we want to keep fighting for that, because this image of Christ in this marriage is what God wants you to fight for. Amen. And it's important to do that.
Amen. I agree 100%. And when people get confused about all that and kind of, well, I've messed up, so therefore somehow that invalidates everything that's happening now. No, that's not right.
That's right.
I mean, live in faithfulness today.
Right.
That's what we want people to do.
Right.
You alluded to it a minute ago, but let me just back up for those who don't know your story. You've got a chapter in your book called 2 Funerals and a Wedding, which kind of summarizes how you guys became a blended family.
Yes.
You mind backing up and telling us a little bit of that
Sure.
story?
So my first husband was killed in a car accident, and my children were 3 months old and 2 years old. And Robbie's first wife died of cancer, and it was very sudden. I got to clear my throat again. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Robbie's first wife died of cancer, and it was very, very sudden. And his children were 12 and 22 when she died. And so 3 years later, we met and got married, and my children were 3 and 5. And his children were 14 and 24. And, well, I said that wrong. Actually, it was 2 years for him and 3 years for me. Anyway, just to be technically correct. But we met online on the internet, and he was widowed. And I thought, he's a lot older than me. He's 10 years older than me. And I thought, well, I don't know if our families are really a good fit for each other, but it's kind of when you've been through the same battle, through the same war, you go, he understands me. Yeah. There's something there that he gets about me that other people don't get. So I said, okay, I'll go on a date with him. And then, of course, the rest is history. and it was kind of crazy. I thought, I don't know if we're suitable. I had a lot of questions before we got married, not because of him. His character was great. He was a good man. But I didn't know that our situation would work out very well. And I was right. It didn't work out great. It was difficult. There was a lot of hardships there, a lot of misunderstandings, different phases of life that we were in, and had to figure out how to make all of that work. And it was hard.
Yeah. I'll say it again. I've said it before on this podcast. God's little joke on us is that we take our vows at the beginning of our wedding, beginning of our marriage, and then life teaches us what we committed ourselves to.
That's right.
We had no idea what we were going to have to do. You know? And that's true of every marriage. It's not just blended family marriage.
Right.
And that's the important piece. Okay, here I am. Now what? We figure it out. We walk with God. We trust Him in the next steps. Speaking of getting married, I read something in your book I didn't know about you. Maybe I'd heard this somewhere, but I'd lost it. Your wedding was in the same room, same facility, as where Robbie's funeral for his first wife was. Mm-hmm. And now you have his adult children, or his two children. One of them was an adult at that time, in the room. Mm-hmm. You have some of your former in-laws, as I recall, and David's sister, I think, was at. So you have extended family from both of those previous relationships right there, and the room itself was a testimony to loss.
Yes,
you've got loss in the title of your book. A home built from love. That part people get, and loss. All right, so a wedding in that room. Looking back, what was going on? What was going on?
Yeah,
in that space.
Now, remember, I got married 10 years earlier. So I had done this 10 years before. It wasn't that long ago when I'd walked the aisle the first time.
Yeah.
And I remember that day. It was very bright. It was beautiful. Everyone was cheery and happy. And here I am 10 years later. I walk into the door expecting the same kind of reaction. And I'm hearing tissues and crying and sniffing. I'm seeing shoulder shaking. I mean, these aren't just glistening tears coming down the cheek. I mean, these are people who are mourning. And of course they were happy faces too, not to paint a bleak picture. But even the happy people were crying. And it was because my husband was going to the church that we got married in, that's also where his first wife's funeral was 2 years earlier. So it hadn't been that long, especially for people who are not in the home, because when you're in the home, when you're the person who's lost a spouse, you deal with that reality every single day, and it's not a surprise. For people that are outside of the home that can somewhat put that out of their mind, they can sort of compartmentalize and leave that out of their mind, then they'll come to these moments where it becomes reality again. And that was definitely one of those moments for a lot of people. So whereas my first husband's family had been on the groom side 10 years earlier, now they're on the bride side. So they're coming as my family into this family. And his in-laws are there. And I know they're all thinking, who is this person? Because we got married really quickly. We got married within 3 months. So we met, started dating. 3 months later, we were engaged. 3 months later, we were married. And it all happened really fast because we wanted the children to be in school at the right time. We were trying to set all that up for our, just normal everyday living. But for everyone else, it was very, very fast. And of course, for us, it was fast too. We didn't realize that.
Yeah.
To us, we felt like this was logical, we're making, decisions based on logic. And
for those of you that cannot see Sabrina's face, if you're watching on YouTube, you just saw it. But for those of you that are listening to the podcast, she was rolling her eyes at herself as she's talking about this.
Yeah, this is what we're thinking, We're so smart. We're making these wise decisions. And anyway, but for everyone else, this is lightning fast.
Yeah.
They're all warning us, going, "You're going too fast. You're going too fast." And Robbie and I are going, "No, we're not going too fast for us." We're not thinking about everyone else. We're not thinking about how much this affects them and their lives as grandparents, as family members. Wondering. I remember talking to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law when my first husband died, and promising them they're my family no matter what. You'll always be my family. But we knew that deep down inside, I couldn't really promise that, because who was I going to marry? Would he see them as family?
Right.
Would he accept them into his home, you know, and let them be with his kids and come to his holidays and mix with his family? And so I know that all this is going through their mind, you know, during this ceremony, thinking, is this it for us? Are we going to have to fight to be a part of their lives now? All of that's going through their heads. And, you know, praise God, this was a relationship where he was the kind of guy that would allow them into their lives. But no one knew that at first. Those were all questions that everyone had. So, you know, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Love and loss. I mean, I just think what a dramatic picture. That wedding, that location, how everybody's feeling. They're coming, as you said, to again experience their sadness over things that have changed for them, losses that they've experienced, and at the same time trying to figure out how to make space for the new.
Right.
Wow. And how then did that play itself out over the first 6 months or so for you, the kids, Robbie?
Well, the first 6 months, you know, there's a reason they call it the honeymoon period. It's kind of everyone sort of feeling each other out, you know, kind of like, where's my place now? Really coming into a house with a bunch of strangers. I remember how it felt to live with my teenage stepson and to think, this is really awkward. You know, it's awkward for me. It's awkward for him.
Right.
We'd only been around each other just a few times, and he's almost grown. And here I'm a woman, you know, that he doesn't know.
Right.
And he doesn't know the rules. He doesn't know what gets on my nerves. You know, he doesn't know my personality. So, like, when do you walk on eggshells and when do you not? You know, it's just really strange. And then for Robbie to be around little kids was very, very hard for him, you know, because he was Mr. Bachelor, basically. He had two, you know, almost grown sons. And I remember, but when we were dating and I would go to his house and hang out and visit, they're sitting there with their feet up in the chairs and, you know, watching a ball game, quiet in the house, dark. And I turned to him, I said, you do realize this life is over. You know, when you marry me, it's over. Because I'm thinking, my kids are running around like crazy. There's blocks all over the place. You're stepping on stuff. There's noise. They're screaming. And they think they're going to translate this life into my life. You know, I'm going, you know, this is over. He goes, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I know it's over. So for the first 6 months for him was, I'm living in a zoo. You know, I mean, he totally forgot what it's like to have, I mean, we're talking about a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, not even in kindergarten yet when we got married. So it was.
And all of those changes for the children create more questions and losses in and of themselves. You say in your book that not everybody grieves the same. It's a myth to think that everybody is grieving at the same rate or same pace. I'm thinking of right now just the illustration you're talking about, blocks on the floor versus quiet watching a baseball game. Step siblings trying to figure out how to share the same space. How'd that go for you guys?
Yeah. Well, thankfully we were in a house where everyone could have their own room. And I really tell people now when they adopt a child or when they're in a step family, make sure everyone has their own space to go to, even if that's a clubhouse in the backyard, you know, where everyone can have somewhere to go.
Escape.
Yes.
When they need to.
Yes. Get out. Like, don't put your adopted child in with your son, you know, in the bedroom. And if you do, if you have to, I realize sometimes there's not space. You know, a friend of mine did this, and I said, do you have a nook anywhere in your house? And she found a little closet under her staircase where he could just put his things and sit there, you know, when he needed to get away from everyone. So thankfully we did have that, especially for the teenager, because I know he was being driven crazy by the little ones because they just thought he was fantastic. You know, they just wanted to hang on his legs and grab him and, you know, and he's going, what have you done to me?
The littles thought the big was fantastic. The big wasn't so impressed.
No. Yeah. I mean, you're talking a 14-year-old, you know, with a 3-year-old. It was kind of crazy. But, you know, all in all, everyone was very kind to each other in those first few months. But you do need to leave that space for everyone to kind of get away, especially, you know, the teenager really needed that time alone. I remember he would spend a lot of time in his room and then he would just kind of like emerge when they went to bed, you know. You just have to leave a lot of room for grace on those things.
Let's talk about step-parenting. So all of a sudden you're a stepmom to kids older than yours,
Right.
quite a bit older than yours. And Robbie's a stepdad to kids quite a bit younger than the ones he had at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Observations about looking back, what would you say are your kind of good takeaways?
Well, good takeaways or like lessons I learned?
Yeah. Either way.
Yeah.
Hard knocks or,
Yes.
insights you gained.
Well, I would say one of the things that the biggest things I learned was that I think when we became a step family, I wanted us all to be together all the time and making memories together. And I really thought that these times together would bond us and form us. And that is true. You do need those times. What I didn't realize was that the kids need time with their biological parent. And this was a big one for me. And that I wrote about in the book, which is that when you create a step family, not only is the child missing the parent that's not in the home, so whether, maybe mom has full-time care of the kids and dad is out of the home, and they miss their dad. And we all know that, and parents are concerned about that, and they try to get time with dad on the weekends or whatever. What we don't realize is that kids also lose the parent in the home to the new spouse. So my kids had me full-time. They spent all their time with me, especially because I was a stay-at-home mom and they were not in school yet. And when I married Robbie, now I want to spend my time with him, so I'm kind of pushing them out.
Yeah. And on occasion, spending time with his kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they were really, especially Benjamin, who was 5, he was very threatened by that. And I had no idea that the alpha male had already risen up in him as a 5-year-old and that he was competing with Robbie over me. And that was very hard for me to watch. Very, very hard. But also what I didn't think about was because even though Seth, my stepson, he was 14 when we got married, I didn't realize that he would grieve the loss of his dad too, and that he needed time with his dad. And that was the biggest mistake I made, was not letting him spend time alone with his dad. I wish I had done that more. And I think Robbie was thinking, oh, good, I have a woman in the house now. She'll take care of the kids for me. I'll go to work. Because his job was very stressful. He was in the military. And he kind of thought, that's something I can stop being concerned about. Worry about my son. He's taken care of. But I was no substitute for him.
Right.
I knew I wasn't a substitute for Seth's mom, but I was no substitute for his dad.
For Robbie.
Yeah. And he needed him. He needed him. And I did not realize how much they needed to spend time together.
Let's dig into that, because the wife part of your heart wants time with your husband.
Right.
you want to see your husband interacting with your kids. And, that's the wife, mom part of your heart. The stepmom part of your heart, I'm hearing you say, didn't realize that Seth needed his dad.
Right.
And therein lies the competition. Everybody's fighting for time with Robbie.
Right.
And so, how could you have managed that differently?
Well, I mean, if I had realized what was happening, I think what you can do is just create space. Create space for it. For example, Robbie and Seth, they kind of had a tradition before I came into the picture of playing golf every Saturday. And I complained about that. I was like, oh, yeah, I see how it is. I had visions of us all spending time together as a family on the weekends and making these memories that were going to bond us together and to create this wonderful family. And what I should have done was just said, great, while you're having your time together, I'll just go do something with my kids, and we'll have that time together.
Because my kids need that with you.
Because my kids needed it too. So we could have, accomplished that. And Robbie and I had already established a date night every Friday night, which is another thing I really recommend. If you can't do it every week, do it every other week. If you can't afford it, do something that you can afford, but make time. So we really kept that time just for us and did our very, very best not to schedule anything else that would conflict with that, or even invite friends. It was just me and him. We didn't want to do, every now and then we'd do a double date, but really it was for that bonding experience. So we already had Friday nights together. And I was thinking the Saturdays would be for family time, you know, like all of us together doing this thing. I should have let them continue doing their thing, and then every now and then say, let's all go do something as a family, you know, or take a day off of work or whatever, like work it in. But I didn't. I had no idea how important that really was and why that would matter.
I just got to say to our listener and to our viewer, this is gold. This is worth the price of the podcast, which was nothing, by the way. What Sabrina is saying is really, really important. And I appreciate you sharing that, because the takeaway here is what you have to sacrifice a little bit of is the dream of familyness quickly. That is, all right, Saturday should be a time. We're all getting together. We're all taking advantage of the day off.
Right.
And therefore, everybody needs to be in the room together, whatever. Instead saying, no, the pathway to familyness starts by compartmentalizing some of our relationships, by acknowledging that there are some bonds that are really important and pre-existed, and kids need the reassurance of time with dad in your case, or the time with mom. And that's the pathway to then all family type activity. You got to do a little bit of both in the first couple of years, and over time you do less and less, perhaps, of the compartmentalization stuff.
Right.
Wow. So good. I'm also thinking about you, stepmom. Well, the oldest was 22 when you guys got married?
24.
24.
Yeah.
We're hearing in our ministry more and more from what we call adult step-parents, you know, who are parenting children that are adults. Out of the home oftentimes, or at college at least. Some of them are in their 30s, you know, have their own families. And one of the things people are asking is, what do I do when I'm motivated towards bonding a relationship with this 35-year-old, for example, but that child isn't? I mean, they're not even a child. They're an adult. They have their own life, their own career. And yeah, they kind of want to get to know me, but they don't really have the same need to connect with me that I do with them. Got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think, you know, for adult children, it affects adult children a lot more than people think it will. I think a lot of people are waiting, sometimes a single parent going, I'll wait till my children are grown and then I'll get married. And they don't realize that a grown child sometimes takes it harder than a child in the home. Again, because you can sometimes compartmentalize. You can sort of like be away from it in your mind. And then when you come back to it, you go, oh, it hits you all over again. So a hard thing for adult children, I think, is coming home. There's no home for them to come home to. Robbie, actually, his dad remarried. His mother died when he was an adult. And he was overseas when it happened. And he came home for the funeral just for a day and then went back overseas again. When he came back a year later, his dad had removed everything out of the home. All of her things were gone, you know, because his dad the whole year is grieving. He's spending the time grieving. He's saying goodbye to things. He meets another woman. He marries her. And Robbie was just devastated when he came home. He was like, I mean, he was, I don't know how old he was, probably in his 30s.
I can only imagine Robbie emotionally was still, you know, almost 2 years in the past. Mom and dad still living, you know, still just even barely touching the reality of mom's passing, let alone dad creating a whole new world.
Exactly. So he said, many times he's shown me the photograph that was taken before he left with him and his dad and his mom. And he said, I had no idea this was the last time I would ever talk to my mom. And he gets back from overseas. Not only has his dad remarried, but everything in the house that belonged to his mother has disappeared. And he said it was like she was erased. And that wasn't his dad's fault, you know, to keep living life and to keep moving forward. It wasn't Robbie's fault. It just was what it was. But he had no way to say goodbye to her. You know, everything was gone. So there, all the grief and all of the saying goodbye, he was removed from his life. And that was very difficult for him. And I don't think we realize that when we remarry, we create a new life. We bring in new things. We get rid of some things. And I remember when we first got married, he still had all of her things in the house. So he just let it be there because everyone does grieve differently. For me, when my spouse died, I had to get rid of his things immediately. I didn't want to see them sitting around me, reminding me every moment that he was gone. I just wanted to clean it up, and face the reality and go, okay, I do better with this if I just realize it is what it is and we move forward.
Not run away from it.
Right. And he was more like, no, he couldn't imagine parting with her things because it would be different, walk in and everything is different. And that reminded him every day.
I can imagine that needed to change for you when
yes.
you moved
so,
into the house.
That's right. So when we got married, he was going to move into my house because my house was a little bigger. I had the room for everyone to have their own bedrooms. And we said, well, we can't have 2 sets of dishes, 2 sets of, rugs, 2 sets of, everything, plus all her clothing. No one needed that. So we had to go through the process of cleaning those things out. In my case, I had his mother-in-law, his first wife's mother, come and help go through this process. And I've still kept tons of her things because even though we went through everything, he said, do you want this? Do you want this? Everything. Of course, the boys were saying, no, no, no. I knew better. So I still have many of her things put in boxes. But point being is that when they come to our house, we have since built a house and we've incorporated all of our things. But at first, we're living in quote unquote my house and they felt like they were in my house. They felt the absence of all of their things.
You're a visitor.
That's right. Yeah. They have no permission, so to speak, to live there. They're more like, like you're saying, visiting or in a hotel or and that's kind of how it is for adult children. When they come home for the holidays, they're not really coming home. They're really going to someone else's home. And even on Christmas or Thanksgiving, they're seeing faces they don't know. My parents, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, whomever may be coming, there is no coming home anymore.
Right. That's right.
And that's a hard thing to do.
That really gets to identity. It gets all the way down to, well, who am I and where do I belong and who are my people?
Right.
And I thought I knew who my people were. Now I'm not so sure where I belong.
Right.
And so, again, all of that creates more loss for them. And to your point, that loss for the adult children gets in the way of them maybe being motivated towards moving toward their step-parent or new step-siblings, if they even call them step-siblings.
Sure.
And so that's just part of that reality. I think we're all the way back to, so that step-parent of those adult children has got to be super, super patient.
Right. That's exactly right. And try not to take things too personally. Yeah. Try to see things from the child's perspective. And that's so hard. That's really, really hard. And then sometimes as a step parent, you lose it. You get your feelings hurt. We are human. Yeah. Even though we're supposed to be the adults and the parents, we're human, and that's where you lose it. And that so often can just be that one thing that happens that makes the relationship go way back, to not ground zero, but almost.
Yes.
I mean, it's easy for
if you only have a little bit of trust built up,
right,
and you do something that sabotages that, then
right,
you're kind of starting over.
And it's so hard. So I mean, there has to be a lot of forgiveness, a lot of grace. Just so much grace there. And again, that's where it goes back to relying on God and going, how much grace does He have on me?
Yeah.
And
endless.
Yes, and just keep putting yourself in that position of humility and saying, I did mess up, I was wrong. And it's really hard because there's such a thing as boundaries too. And you have to set up boundaries. You have to say, look, I am the adult figure here, I need respect. But, finding that line is just a dance.
Yeah. You've got a whole chapter on parenting and guilt. Tell us just a little bit about how that maybe played a role in your journey.
It was like the defining emotion for many years. Excuse me. It was a defining emotion for many years because there's so much question, not only as a step parent and having those explosive moments or not understanding and realizing, especially in a home, in any blended family, you're going to have grief. You're just going to have grief. And even if it's from divorce, there's grief there. In our family, it was death. And it's so hard to tell, especially with preteens, teenagers. Is this a result of them just being a teenager? Mm. Or is this a result of them having a grief moment?
Or some combination of the two?
Yes.
Yeah, it's so difficult
Yes, to know. And the way you react to them, and you're wondering about yourself. Mm. Am I reacting out of a reasonable reason, or am I being emotional and having my own set of grief at this moment? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So many conflicting emotions. And then for my children, they would be in a situation with Robbie where he would be yelling, or they would be upset, or trying to pit one parent against the other, or put you in a trap of some kind. And then you have this guilt of, did I do the right thing? Mm-hmm. Did I marry the right person? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And let's flesh that out. So if you, as biological mom, are questioning what's happening between your children and now your husband, and you're feeling a little guilty that your decision made this a moment happen. I mean, that's a lot of guilt to carry. But anyway, you're sort of feeling that. Then don't you naturally lean towards protecting your kids?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can. Yeah. I mean, you really have to fight that urge to blame your spouse for everything. You shouldn't have done this and you shouldn't have done that. And forget that your child is not the perfect angel that you wish that they were. That maybe your child might have something to do with the conflict. And that's difficult because you're going, well, you're an adult and you should know better. But again, that grief really plays a huge role in a blended family. Yeah. The losses that you feel, the sadness, the sorrow, it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. All those questions of, is this the right person? Did I make the right decision? On and on.
There is a godly grief that leads to repentance, we're told in the scriptures. But I think this guilt that you're talking about is more of an ungodly grief. It's I'm shaming myself.
Right.
And doesn't that just make you paralyzed? Doesn't that make you, again, side with your kids indiscriminately about whether or not they're partially at fault or fully at fault or whatever the case is?
Sure.
So all of a sudden, I think you end up stuck.
Right.
And I can anticipate what that's going to do for the biological parent and the step parent who see it differently. Now you're stuck apart.
That's exactly right. And you do have to keep coming together. Again, the relationship between husband and wife, that's the relationship that's going to last.
Right.
I mean, your kids will always be a part of your life, but they won't always be in your home. And if the husband and the wife are not stable, the whole family falls apart.
Right. So you got to bridge those gaps.
You have to. Yeah, you have to. That has to be the focus. And as much as we do have to make time for the kids, and we do have to make time for making sure that the family comes together and those kinds of things, because you don't want to get into a situation where you go, okay, you raise your kids, I'll raise my kids, and when they all turn 18, we'll get back together again. You can't do that either, because then you're building up your lives without one another, and now you're just strangers at the end of that 18 years. So it's very deliberate. I mean, you have to keep coming together. That's why things like date nights are so important, to keep coming back. And I remember a time when we were in the middle of just a big, terrible fight. I mean, I felt like Robbie was very unfair to my son, and I felt like he was too harsh, and I felt like his military was coming out, and I'm like, he's 5, and I was just about ready just to go, you're not the right guy. I don't know what we're going to do. I can't divorce you. I'm a marriage ministry person, but I'm never talking to you again. It's like, you're going to live in the basement. And I mean, I was just ready to, I was just like, this is terrible. But we had already, it was a Friday, and the babysitter was already coming. Like, it was already set up, paid for, ready to go. And I'm like, I have to go out with this guy who I just despise at this moment.
Wow.
And it was not a good week. It was not good at all. And we sat down at the table, and I'm thinking to myself, how am I even going to sit here with him and act like I'm having a good time? And I just looked up at him, and he just had this softness in his face, in his eyes. And I literally thought to myself, there you are. That's the guy I married. There he is. And it took time just to get out of that environment, back to just us and being together. And I thought, if we didn't have that babysitter coming already, I would never have gotten into this moment. I would never be here and seeing him. I just would have shut him out of my life. And I don't know how long he would have been shut out. Could have been a long time. Or it could have been forever.
I'm sure you guys had to unpack all of that. Eventually you had to talk through the parenting stuff and try to get some resolution about how you're going to go forward, together.
Right.
But I got to just commend you for A, going on the date, and B, allowing yourself, even when you looked up and you saw him, you go, oh, there's the guy I fell in love with. Allowing yourself to move back toward him, even though there was another part of you that's saying, run away, done with this guy. Those are the moments that make or break relationships, honestly. When we push ourselves through fear back toward, even in the midst of uncertainty, those are telling moments. And it's a micro moment that gives you a chance at then unpacking and finding each other again.
And it all goes back to grace again. I mean, we have to say, remember, I'm not perfect either. It's so easy to get self-righteous in those moments when you go, oh, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that, and anybody could see that this is the way it should have been done. And then, but for the grace of God, there go I. I mean, I had moments exactly like that, in my life. So how can you continue to hold that over that person when you know that you're just as guilty and that you need just as much grace and forgiveness as the next person? And I think it comes down to that self-awareness and knowing that we need God's grace every single day, and we need grace from people in our lives every single day. How can we not give the grace that we ourselves demand from everyone else?
It's well said. You close your book by saying there can be beautiful from the broken. Broken can be beautiful, you say.
Yeah.
Offer a word to somebody listening who's like, yeah, I don't think so. Not today. Doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Yes, they feel completely broken. And I use this image of a vase, like a pottery vase. And sometimes that vase gets shattered to pieces, really. I mean, it's not just broken like cracked.
Yeah.
It's broken like that's not ever going to be a vase again.
Shattered.
I mean, sweep it up and put it in the dustpan. That's how a lot of people feel in a blended family. You think, in that moment when I was mad at Robbie and I didn't want to go on a date with him, that's how I felt. I felt like this marriage is shattered. But maybe that vase was never meant to be a vase. Maybe the master artist, the Lord God Almighty, is going to take those pieces and he's going to put them and lay them out and turn them into a beautiful piece of artwork, a beautiful mosaic. And sometimes when those shattered pieces are laying all over the floor, it doesn't look like a beautiful mosaic. But when the artist gets a hold of those pieces and he starts putting them where they need to go, they turn into something amazingly beautiful that you would never even imagine. Now, it's not a vase. It's not what it was originally intended to be, but maybe that's not what it was meant to be in the end. And when we give our broken pieces to God, that's what he does with our lives. He turns them into something that is beautiful. And there's a quote, I think it was Hemingway that was actually attributed to the quote, even though they say maybe he never really actually said it. But he said, when something's broken, that's how the light gets through. And I love that imagery of this broken family that God is shining his light through, that you can see kind of this beautiful expression of who he is coming through behind and shining through those broken pieces. So brokenness doesn't mean ugliness. Brokenness can be beautiful.
The book is A Home Built from Love and Loss, Coming Together as a Blended Family. Sabrina, thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
Check out the show notes to learn more about Sabrina and all the work that she is doing. A quick reminder that Family Life Blended is a donor-supported ministry. Every dollar you give is tax deductible. And this month, for a gift of any amount, we'll send you our premium resource for free. That's right, for free. But you have to donate specifically to Family Life Blended, not to Family Life in general. So look for the link in our show notes. That'll take you to the right place. Please take a minute to rate us or leave a review. And if you haven't subscribed yet, either to the podcast or to watch on YouTube, I want to encourage you to do that so you don't miss any of our future episodes. Another reminder, if you're looking for my speaking schedule, my live stream schedule, go to smartstepfamilies.com and click events. It sure would be fun to meet you face-to-face at some event coming up soon. And speaking of live events, our next summit on Step Family Ministry is Thursday and Friday, October 10th and 11th, 2024. We're going to be in Dallas this year, so get that on your calendar and plan to join us. Or, if not you, tell a leader from your local church about it. We would love to have children's pastors, student pastors, adult ed people, senior pastors, anybody can learn something about how to minister to step families in their particular aspect of ministry in a local church. And of course, we want couples and small group leaders and anybody who's interested. We'd love to have them. Okay, next time on Family Life Blended, Gayla Grace and I are going to be talking about overcoming common myths of step parenting. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening or watching. And thank you to our production team and donors who make this podcast possible. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.